Hi, so my name is Noémie Ott. On behalf of the Young EFC, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second career webinar. Today we welcome Professor Jerry Frankel that will share his reflection about his career. If you have missed the first event that took place on February 25th, where we welcome Professor Fatima Montemor, we actually recorded it and it will be shared, and it was shared on our YouTube channel, and this one as well will be shared on the YouTube channel. The link will pop up in the chat later on. I don't know if really Jerry needs an introduction to the corrosion community, but so Jerry is currently a distinguished professor of engineering in the Department of Material Science and Engineering, but as well the director of the Fontana Corrosion Center at Ohio State University. You received your Bachelor of Science in Material Science Engineering from Brown University, and then your Doctor of Science as well in Material Sciences Engineering from MIT. And prior to joining Ohio State University, you actually come for a while to Switzerland at ETH. And you were as well afterwards a research staff member at IBM Watson Research Center in Yorkton Heights in the US, or back to the US. Of course, like for us in the corrosion community, you're very well known for your contribution towards like the passivation and localized corrosion, as well to revisiting the point defect model, but as well for your contribution for corrosion inhibition, protective coating, and atmospheric corrosion. Most of us know you as well because you're a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Electrochemical Society and Corrosion, and as well to popping into you at different conferences. And of course, because of your extraordinary career and extensive contribution, you were awarded a lot of prize and award. And the last one was, I think, in 2019 from the French Corrosion Society, where you got the Grand Médaille from Sefracar, but as well, you got the VR Whitney Award from NACE International in 2015, the UR Events Award from the UK Institute of Corrosion in 2011, and different other awards through your career. Which I didn't know. I actually learned it while reading your biography. You served as a member of the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board from 2012 to 2016 after being appointed by President Obama. And in 2016, you became the director of a DOE-funded Engineering Frontier Research Center, which focus on the performance of nuclear waste forms. So I really look forward to welcome you today to hear a bit more about your career and a bit of the view about how it was when you were a student and through your career, or how it evolved. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so Noémie, thank you so much for that introduction and for the invitation to talk to the Young EFC. Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time in Europe, and in fact, you mentioned that Philippe, that I got this grand medal from Sefracar, and when I got it, Philippe Marcuse sort of conferred upon me honorary European status. So I feel close to the European corrosion community. It's also been an interesting opportunity for me. So this year I turned 65, which is kind of a traditional retirement age here in the United States. So, it really, it gave me a chance to look back and reflect on my career. And so I'm going to talk about my career. You went through it, Noémie, about the different positions that I've had. Now, I'll go through that again. And I'm going to focus primarily on the early part of my career and my life, and tell some stories that haven't been told before. So hopefully you'll find them interesting. Let me share my screen. is that looking good?
Yes, it does.
Trying to get the laser on. Not working. Okay, I don't know why. So yeah, so my talk is entitled Reflections on My Career. And I think when all of you registered, you were given the opportunity to ask some questions. And this was the list that Noémie gave me earlier this week. I hope to have a chance to address some of them, but certainly would encourage you even to break in during this presentation. If we can make it a conversation, that would be great, as hard as it is on Zoom. Feel free to just unmute and speak up, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. So, okay, well, let me start at the beginning. Yeah, so I was born here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 65 years ago. Pittsburgh is one of the steelmaking centers, or traditionally was sort of the Ruhrgebiet of the United States. Although I don't think that had any impact on me becoming a metallurgist. But I was born in Pittsburgh. Yeah, in fact, no one in my family was in the steel business or was even a scientist or an engineer. My mother was a school teacher, though she was not really well suited for that, I would say. She was born at a time, my mother was born in 1929, a time in this country when young women really had two career options, as to be a school teacher or a nurse. And luckily that's changed. Many of you here are women, and so you can now pursue your dream in whatever field you want. But I will say that in my generation, we benefited a lot by having teachers who were very bright women who could only become teachers. So that was my mother. My father was a store manager, not a great profession. He's still alive. So my father here is 96, not doing great, although you can see he looks good. Also in this picture is my beautiful wife, June, my elder daughter, Dana. I have two daughters. That's not my other daughter. That's my niece who was joining us on this visit. This was last month. And I show you Dana. Dana, some of you on the line here will know that Dana also has a PhD in material science. So yes, the goal of all forms of life is to propagate the species. And while I don't have grandchildren yet, I have propagated the species of material scientists. So that's Dana. Dana, by the way, recently changed jobs. She now works for Apple in Cupertino, California. She's a true metallurgist, by the way. She does alloy design. Okay, so my father changed jobs when I was 15, and we moved to a suburb of Boston, where I finished up my schooling in this suburb of Boston. And yeah, so in school, I like math, I like physics, I like chemistry, but I knew that I didn't want to become a mathematician or a physicist or a chemist. So I thought I'd try engineering. I didn't really know, because I didn't know any engineers. I didn't really know what engineering was, but it seemed to be a little more practical than being a scientist. And I'll tell you one story. I remember as I was finishing, a teacher came up to me and asked me what I was going to study. And I said, well, engineering. And he looked at me and he said, well, you should do something good for the world, which I didn't quite know what to make of that, especially coming from a guy who taught me philosophy. And the only good thing I learned in that class was how to use chopsticks, maybe one of the most important things that I learned in high school. But anyway, I think that I have done some good in the world, during my career. So, but it's not bad advice. You can take that for what you want. I was very lucky then to be admitted to and to attend Brown University. So Brown is a very good school, part of the Ivy League, the famed Ivy League schools in the US. And they had a small engineering program that, at least at that time, was structured so that students for the first 2.5 years took courses in the different types of engineering. And then the last 1.5 years, you specialized. So of all those courses, the one that I liked the best was material science. So I decided to study material science. And material science seemed to offer that combination of science and practical application. Yeah, that's how I got into material science. I was a good student. I got good grades. And I think that one of my major skills in life is test taking. Somehow I can take tests and do well in it. I don't think that correlates very well with anything else, with future success, although it does open up opportunities. Getting good grades does open up opportunities. But as I was finishing there, it's interesting as I look back that none of my professors came to me and said, well, Jerry, you're a good student. You should think about going to graduate school. Yeah, so for some reason, no one did that. And I decided to get a job. Okay, so I went to work for this company, Arthur D. Little in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was at the time a big consulting firm. They did business and technology consulting. And that was a good opportunity. I got involved in a lot of different things. I'll tell you, one of the projects that I did was ended up in this paper is making and testing of lanthanum hexaborites single crystals. Okay, so at this company, they had a piece of equipment that, well, let me just say, lanthanum hexaboride is a very bright electron emitter. So in electron microscopy, say in scanning electron microscopy, or other types, you need a bright source of electrons, and the typical cathode is tungsten, although Lab 6, as I said, is a strong emitter of electrons. And at the time, the only source of LAB6 rods were sintered polycrystals. And as they were used, the tip would slowly evaporate, and it would change from one grain orientation to another, and the brightness would change. So we had in the lab a piece of equipment that allowed for the fabrication of single crystal rods. It was a laser heated floating zone method, a pretty interesting technique. And we had this collaboration. They actually funded the work, these gentlemen from IBM Watson Research Center, which is interesting because as you'll hear later, I ended up working there many, many years later. And I show you the last author. His name is Alec Browers. Sir Alec Browers was an expert in electron microscopy. He returned back to England and was knighted. And actually, after that, he was given some kind of peerage. And I don't understand British aristocracy. I'm sure that someone on the line here can clarify things, but if I'm not mistaken, that peerage should trump the knighthood, and I should be calling him Baron Browers. So anyway, he's an interesting guy. I ran into him about 10 years ago, and he told me what he was doing, which was organizing something called the Queen Elizabeth Prize in Engineering. So he set that up, and he went on to chair the selection committee for a number of years. And the Queen Elizabeth Prize in Engineering provides £500,000 for the development of some important technology, such as the internet and global positioning system, GPS, and LED lighting. Those have been winners. So he was a pretty interesting guy, and I think an interesting person to have as a co-author on my very first publication. So if you ever see my CV, this is paper number one. So yeah, it turns out that the guys that I worked with at Arthur D. Little all had advanced degrees, and they supported me taking courses, so taking graduate courses. So they allowed me to drive across Cambridge over to MIT several times a week. There was no distance learning in those days. And so I took one course a semester over the period of 2 years. And then in 1980, I quit. I actually spent the summer of 1980 traveling around Europe on a train pass from Ireland to Istanbul, and came back and started a graduate program. So at MIT, I figured, yeah, having taken 4 courses, it would be easy for me to finish up a master's degree, in quick time. But, one thing led to another, and I ended up with a PhD, which is called an SCD there at MIT. And I decided to work for this guy, Ron Lanthanum. So Ron Lanthanum, yeah, I chose him because, well, he's a very nice guy. He's a good teacher. And he taught one of the 4 courses that I had taken to that point that was in corrosion. So, I like corrosion, and, corrosion similarly seemed to sit in that space of scientific and practical applications. And yeah, that's how I got into corrosion, and I've never regretted it. So, all of you know that corrosion is a great field, not necessarily a sexy topic. You'll never win the Queen Elizabeth Prize as a corrosionist, but there are a lot of very important, very challenging, very interesting problems to address. Corrosion won't go away, so it's sort of job security. And of course, I've had great opportunities and met a lot of great colleagues along the way. So that was really a lucky choice. I'll tell you, and I'll talk more about it later, but my PhD thesis was in the area of dislocation transport of hydrogen. Okay, so hydrogen embrittlement is connected with the association of hydrogen at traps in metals, different kinds of traps like grain boundaries, voids, and dislocations. So hydrogen can sit at the core of a dislocation, and also for an edge dislocation, hydrogen will be concentrated in this region of expanded lattice below the extra half plane of atoms. And what's unique, of course, about dislocations as a trap is that they're mobile. And the thinking is that as dislocations move through a lattice, they can drag their cloud of hydrogen with them to transport hydrogen at a rate faster than by diffusion alone, transport it maybe deep into the metal and promote embrittlement. So I'll say a few more words about that later, but I do want to talk a little more about Ron Lanthanum. So when I advise students about graduate school, there are various things that need to be considered. And one is the choice of professor. I think it's important to have a professor. That relationship is very important. You need to find a professor who matches your own personal style. And so I think there are generally 2 types of professors. There are old dogs and young bucks, and you can decide for yourself which one of those I am. But let's just say the young bucks are, in this country anyway, maybe assistant professors, untenured assistant professors who are very anxious to get tenure. They will have a small group, work closely with students, and push them to get their work done. In contrast, old dogs have a lot of things going on. They generally don't work real closely with the students who have therefore more freedom. Well, they have a larger group, so they're are people to support your work. And they also have connections that can be useful. Ron Lanthanum at the time was a young man, so he was in his mid-30s, but he acted like an old dog. So he famously would come into the lab once a week on Fridays to get water, to water the plants in his office. So we had a lot of freedom, and I'll tell you that all of my colleagues from those days have achieved in their careers a lot. So we benefited from that. Ron was also very politically connected. And for instance, one of the things he did was, after the summer after my first year at MIT, he organized a conference. It was called Atomistics of Fracture. It resulted in this book. It was a conference that took place in France on the island of Corsica. Corsica is known as the birthplace of Napoleon. And I hope that some of the people on the line here have been to Corsica. It's a beautiful island, a lot of wonderful beaches, and as well, towering mountains. So this was a very interesting, interesting conference. It was organized like a Gordon conference, sessions in the morning and the evening, with the afternoons free to do things like hike or go in the sea. If memory serves, I spent a lot of time windsurfing. It was organized by NATO. So it was organized by NATO, and the people were, the participants were by invitation only. So there were people from NATO countries and a few other places. I was the only graduate student there. So my job was to run the slide projector. Yes, people came with boxes of slides, and it was a particularly finicky slide projector. It kept jamming. So that was my important role in this conference. But I had the opportunity to meet a lot of the big names in the field. So here's the conference photo, and the list of names is over here. A lot of people from England, France, and Germany. Names you might know: Marcel Courbet, it was here. This guy here was John Scully, not John Scully at the University of Virginia, who is my age. This is John Scully from Leeds. So he's J.C. Scully. The younger is J.R. Scully. I remember that because J.R. is like junior and J.C. is like Jesus Christ. And John Scully, the elder here, wrote a good book on corrosion, actually. So there are other names here that you might know. Martin Saya, a surface scientist; Brian Conway, an electrochemist; Jean Fidel. Let me see here, this guy, Bockris. Okay, John O'Malley Bockris, one of the great electrochemists, wrote a lot of books. And then behind him was a young guy who was clearly getting too much sun. Yeah, let's see others. This guy here, Peter Neumann, was Martin Stratman's advisor. There's Ron Lanthanum. This guy here is Jacques Houdard, was the advisor of Philippe Marcuse. Who else is on the list here? These are famous guys in the field of hydrogen: Bernstein and Thomson. Stan Lynch from Australia, famous for liquid metal embrittlement. Dick Oriani, the father of the decohesion theory of hydrogen embrittlement. Yeah, several others. John Hirth, the dislocation guy. John Knott was a famous metallurgist from Cambridge University. So it was really quite the opportunity to get to know these people. You know, here are some pictures from the conference. Here's Marcel Courbet, Marcel et Madame Courbet, John Hirth, and Thompson and Bernstein. This guy was Conway. Here's John Scully. Yeah, this is Bockris. Bockris, he had this style. Every time he asked a question, he would stand up and he put his foot up on his chair and lean his arm on it, and then ask his question like that. It was an interesting style. Never knew anyone else that did that. Here's Oriani. I took this picture and he never forgave me that it ended up in the book, him resting in a hammock. So again, it was quite the experience. I also met Marcel Pourbet later. So you can see this is 1984. He visited MIT. Marcel Pourbet was born in 1904. So we celebrated his 80th birthday. You can see here with some cake. And he's talking with Herb Uhlig, was the retired MIT famous corrosion professor. And here's a young PhD student coming up to say hello, and one of my colleagues took this picture. And I always show this after I present Pourbet diagrams in the corrosion class and talk about Marcel Pourbet. Many of you might know that, of course, he's Belgian. And when he presented his PhD at the University of Brussels, the committee decided that it was unworthy of a PhD and declined to confer a PhD on him. And what he did was not give up. He went to TU Delft, which is not far away, but he had to learn Dutch and defend his thesis there in Dutch. And they granted him a degree, and later, University of Brussels granted a degree to Pourbet. And the lesson, the moral of that story is that if you believe in something, you should persist and not give up. And he was a great example of that. Certainly, we all benefit from the work he did in Pourbet diagrams. Okay, I want to go back to dislocation transport. Again, this was the topic of my PhD thesis. And my job was to follow the work of Matti Korkela. Matti, a guy from Finland, was finishing up his PhD, and he had published in Scriptum Metallurgica, which is now Scriptum Materialia. He published what was widely considered the best evidence for dislocation transport of hydrogen. So I assume that some of you might be in the hydrogen field. You know, it's part of corrosion. This is a setup, the Davanathan-Stachursky method, which is a very common approach in the hydrogen field. What you do is have a sample, a thin sample that separates two electrochemical cells. On the input side is the cathodic side. You pass a current, make this, this surface a cathode. You pass a current, evolve hydrogen that enters the lattice, penetrates through. And then on the exit surface, we have a potentiostatic system polarizing the potential above the reversible potential for the hydrogen reaction, such that the hydrogen that emerges at this surface is oxidized to form H+, and that current is then a measurement of the permeation flux. So again, a very standard approach for studying hydrogen diffusion and hydrogen trapping. And what Matti did was to revise this method to make the sample a tensile sample, okay, that was then pooled in tension. And his approach was to first deform the sample. So here's a stress strain curve, deform the sample. So first was actually, before doing that, was to passivate the exit surface. So you get a low background passive current density. And then you deform the sample, and the passive current density increases because of the oxidation of emerging slip steps. So fresh metal area is exposed during the plastic deformation of that surface, reaching a new passive current density. So that's what that is. And then he started charging. So he turned on the cathodic charging on the input side, on the cathodic side, and the current increased attributed to hydrogen permeation. He stopped charging, it went away, stopped deformation, and the surface decays back to the passive region. So this this was considered to be the best evidence, best direct evidence of dislocation transport of hydrogen, rapid transport of hydrogen from the input to the exit surface. In fact, you can see that the extent of that signal increased as the strain rate increased. Okay. So that was all well and good. Interestingly, though, after we returned from France, and about 2 weeks after Madi successfully defended his PhD thesis, and about 2 weeks before I was to take the PhD candidacy exam, part of which was to stand in front of a panel of professors and defend the proposal of my work. So somewhere right between those two events, we received from Scripta Met a paper, and we were asked to, well, my professor was asked to write a response to it. And this paper was by Otsuka and Asaji, two Japanese scientists that my professor didn't know, okay? And what they did was to rather clearly show that the work of Kurkla and Lanthanum was an artifact, okay? So they did the same experiment, started deformation, the current increased, started charging, the current increased, stopped charging, the current decreased. So, and they found that the increment in the current increased as the charging current density increased. Okay. One thing that I didn't tell you was that the charging current density in that work of Kurkla and Lanthanum was 150 milliamps per centimeter squared. So if you've ever polarized the sample to a cathodic current density of 150 milliamps per centimeter squared, it looks like this. Hydrogen bubbles are rapidly generated on the surface. Okay. And the current then has to pass through the film that separates all those bubbles. So despite the conductivity of the charging solution being high, there is a rather high resistivity. And Joule heating is current times voltage, or I squared R. The Joule heating will increase the temperature. And what they did, Otsuka and Asaji, was to switch the polarity on the charging surface and passed an anodic current. Okay. And by passing an anodic current at that current density, they, instead of evolving hydrogen, they evolved oxygen bubbles. And you can see that the signal on the exit surface increased by the same amount. Or what they did was to add hot water to the input surface. They added hot water in a few degrees temperature range above the ambient, and the current on the exit surface also increased. So this was an activation controlled current dependent on the temperature, and that measurement was indeed artifact. So I was immediately convinced by this work. My professor, Ron Lanthanum, not. Okay, so we had just come from a conference where people talked about dislocation transport as an important part of the embrittlement process, talked about the Kurkla-Lanthanum work as being the best evidence of that. And so I recall we had some group meetings to figure out why Otsuka and Asaji were wrong. And this was the response, the introduction anyway. So that the current might have been caused by a rise in temperature due to Joule heating, but for a number of reasons, we find the latter interpretation unlikely. Okay, I didn't believe that, but that is what was in the response. So yeah, 2 weeks later, I stood up in front of these professors, none of whom knew about this work of Otsuka and Asaji, other than Ron Lanthanum. He didn't believe it. But I stood up and told them how I was going to continue the work of Madi Kurkla and passed that candidacy exam. First thing I did after that was to do some experiments to show that they were right. I handed them over to Professor Lanthanum. I said, here you go. And he didn't really look at it. That is until a year later. A year later, we received another paper from ScriptNet, this time from Herb Johnson, who was a famous man in the field from Cornell University. And so what Johnson did was to use this technique, or he turned the sample vertically so that the hydrogen bubbles could go up. And indeed, so the horizontal cell had a higher temperature rise than the vertical cell. So this couldn't be ignored. Ron Lanthanum looked at my data, and eventually that got published. This is what I had done. So on the charging side, I attached a pump that swept the bubbles away. And you can see that when I started circulation, the current decreased. And then when I stopped circulation, the current increased. And yeah, anyway, that is Joule heating. I'll tell you that that Korkla-Lanthanum paper is still receiving citations. I know that there was a young woman at Notre Dame University who a few years later I found out was using the same method that Matti Korkla used. So this lives on, but there was a moral to the story, a lesson learned for me, and that was to be skeptical. Okay, so we do research that is hypothesis driven, and we should do that. And when you do experiments and get data that supports your hypothesis, in general, you're happy about that. But what I recommend is that you react to that by not believing it, okay? And by assuming that it's wrong or artifactual, and then proving to yourself that it's actually correct, okay? Don't start out by assuming that, yay, it supports what, it's what I expected. But in contrast, the opposite approach. So in corrosion, we make these indirect measurements, right? We measure impedance spectra and, interpret them in all kinds of ways. And so it is, let's say these electrochemical methods are particularly susceptible to artifact and misinterpretation. So yeah, that's what I learned, was to be skeptical. Okay, I eventually did some work that I think proved dislocation transport. It was actually a very subtle thing. What I did was the typical Davenant-Stachorsky approach of charging first, reaching a steady state flux, and then starting deformation. And it got complicated. I used single crystals, okay, because in polycrystals, when you deform them, what you do is multiply the dislocation density enormously through the various dislocation sources and tangles during the hardening process. In single crystals that are aligned the appropriate way can exhibit easy glide. So this is the stress strain curve. They undergo a wide range of slip at low stresses before the hardening sets in. And in that range, there is some evidence of dislocation transport, and it shows up in these papers. So yes, I got my PhD. Okay, what time is it here? Oh, I gotta hurry up. I just got my PhD and look what time it is. Okay, so I went to Switzerland. This guy here, Fritz Hunkler, was a postdoc in our lab at MIT. He came from Hans Böhne's lab at the ETH in Zurich. And he was an Ober assistant there, although then he left. My wife and I became friends with him and his wife. And in fact, two of his kids have over the years come to live with us here in our country. So I did a postdoc for a year in Switzerland. It was very rewarding professionally and personally. So there I learned about pitting corrosion. I did some, I think, important work in in metastable pitting of stainless steels. I'm not going to talk about that. Okay, I'm going to tell a little story about the Oosterhallenbad. Okay, Oosterhallenbad. This is what it looks like now. In the middle of my time there, this is what happened. Okay, it was a disaster. 12 people died. And Noémie might know about this. The EMPA investigated it. And the story is that there was a building and a concrete ceiling was hung from the roof of that building by metal bars. Those bars were stainless steel bars. Okay, stainless steel in this environment where we use chlorine to keep the pool clean and healthy. Chlorine fumes were in the building. It's a strong oxidizer, reduced to chloride. And these bars, 50 of them or so were corroded. A year before, someone was up inspecting, saw some broken bars, and famously just got them welded back together. Okay, so this was a major disaster. The ceiling fell, sealed off in the pool. And I have the diving board here because under the diving board, there was a break in the concrete and some people were saved through that. Could have been a much worse disaster. This was a pool where the Swiss national team trained. So there was a club that was using the pool. There was not a swim meet. There were not a lot of people. It was a topic that was discussed at some detail as I was there at the twice daily Kaffeepausen. And my Schweizerdeutsch was not so great by May. But famously, if I remember correctly, and I couldn't find it by searching in the internet, there was this quote, "Rostfreier Stahl rostet nicht." Okay, Rostfreier Stahl is one name for stainless steel in German. So rust-free steel doesn't rust, or let's say stainless steel doesn't corrode. That was the building designer after the accident. And if anyone on the line here believes that, then we are in trouble. And in fact, Hans Böhni, the professor of this institute, the YEFC, was in the civil engineering department and was responsible for teaching materials to civil engineers like the gentleman who designed this building. So this was of interest to me, one, because at the time I was living in the town of Uster. Luckily, I wasn't swimming in pools. I was swimming in the Greifensee or the Limmat, but also because I was studying the corrosion of stainless steels. So yeah, that was an interesting story. But I left there, by the way, while I was there, Sanna Virtanen came as a graduate student, and later after that, Patrick Schmucki. And so that was, I got to travel in Europe and meet a lot of people. But I was very lucky after that to get a job at the IBM Watson Research Center in Yorktown Heights, New York. This was a great place to work. I'll tell you, at that time, IBM research was leading the world. There had been other great research centers. The US Steel, Ford Motor Research were at one time great. Bell Labs had just gone through a breakup. The Bell company was broken up and Bell Labs was on its way down. IBM was leading, and in fact, there was a lab at Zurich that helped helped them win 2 Nobel Prizes, superconductivity and scanning probe microscopy. So IBM was making money like crazy on mainframe computers. And this research center was a place where people were doing all kinds of things. And I was in an electrochemistry group doing corrosion. And in fact, that's where I learned electrochemistry. A bunch of great electrochemists. They were electroplating magnetic materials and conductors for microelectronics. So yeah, that was really a wonderful opportunity, although IBM changed a lot during the time I was there. And in fact, is really nothing now like the company that it was, that started in the late 80s as I was there. And my job changed. I started doing things. I studied electrodeposition, and we were looking at medical sensors. So it wasn't clear what my career would have been had it not been for, I'm going through this stuff, had not been for this job opening up at Ohio State University. And so, and I'll tell you that I was not the first choice of the department here. The department offered this position to Peter Andresen, who was a scientist at GE, who was big in the field of stress corrosion cracking. And he turned them down, and I took the job. So it's been a great place to be. Yeah, let me tell you about the Fontana Corrosion Center. It's a great place to be because there's a very long history in corrosion, so it has some respect. Mars Fontana was a guy who was department chair for 27 years, wrote this book that people for a long time used around the world on corrosion engineering. He had a student, Roger Staley. Okay, so Roger was an undergraduate here, and he went through a military program called ROTC, it's officer training. He graduated and joined the Navy. He went on the staff of Admiral Hyman Rickover, who was the head of the nuclear Navy. So we now have, our Navy ships are run by nuclear power plants. And this was in 57, he graduated. He learned all about the corrosion problems associated in the nuclear world. And there were a lot of them at that time, not just in the Navy, but for land-based power plants. Came back in 1961 and did a PhD. Basically, he was a PI on a project. Immediately joined the faculty and stayed until 1979 when he went to University of Minnesota. At that time, Digby McDonald came. Digby came to Ohio State in 1979, stayed till 1983. And while he was here, he had two Chinese students that were married, Chow and Lin, who developed the point defect model. Of course, he left and went on to other things. Bob Rapp was here for a long time, high temperature corrosion guy. And then Susan Smialowska came, Brian Wild, who was big name corrosion from US Steel, came. They all retired. They all retired when I came in 1995. 2 years later, Rudy Buckheit came, became department chair, and then he's Dean of Engineering, University of Kentucky. We have hired two young people, Jen Locke and Eric Schindelholtz. So when I retire, corrosion will continue here. Okay, so I'll end with a few keys to a happy career. Follow your heart. Of course, first you have to know it. And I'll tell you one thing is that I never got into administration. Unlike a lot of my colleagues, Rudy Buckheit, John Scully, Nick Burbillis are all became administrators. And I knew that I didn't want to do it, wouldn't have been good at it. I don't like conflict. So I think that helped my career. Pick a good advisor. You need mentors in your life. Not always easy. Pick good colleagues. You can't always pick your colleagues, but you can sometimes pick the people you want to work with. Pick good topics to work on. Okay, so in corrosion, there are fads, okay? Fads where people join in, and once someone does something, everyone joins in. These are areas that were hot topics sort of before I started. Auger became a technique and everyone started using it. Of course, surface analysis, a big part of corrosion now. Stress corrosion cracking was a hot topic. Environmental cracking, as I indicated, because of the nuclear industry, it was a very hot topic in the 80s. Amorphous or glassy metals was a hot topic. And I joined in a number of fads. Sputter deposited aluminum alloys or stainless aluminum alloys was a fad. Because of funding from the US Air Force Office of Scientific Research, high strength aluminum alloys became a focus. A lot of people did work on it. Inhibition of those alloys by chromate and chromate free is, still are topics. Alloy 22 became a topic because of the plan to use alloy 22 as a canister for storing nuclear waste in the US. So in the early 2000s, that was a hot topic. What I call anomalous hydrogen evolution otherwise known as the negative difference effect. That was a hot topic 5 or so years ago. 5,000 alloy sensitization was a topic. And now high entropy alloys, additive manufacturing, corrosion modeling, prediction, in situ TEM, these are kind of the current hot topics. So being involved in the hot topic is not a bad thing. Just follow along with the crowd. It's good to be involved in topics where a lot of people are interested. Okay, some other things. Be skeptical. I talked about that. Be lucky. All right. I've been very lucky. How do you be lucky? I don't know, but it helps for a happy career. Enjoy your job or change it. Okay. You want to get up in the morning and be excited about going to work. If you're not excited about going to work, find something else to do. Okay. And the last thing, be compassionate towards others. And, I can talk about that. It helps you be happy in life, but certainly in your career. So I went a little long, but, I'll end it there, and I'm happy to have a discussion with anyone who has any questions. So thanks again, Noémie.
Thank you so much. It was super interesting, and I think like a lot of us didn't know necessarily all the story behind and all your career path. So it was very nice. It was very reflection. And yes, we're still talking about this accident of the swimming pool, and by still investigating all the Swiss swimming pool regularly to avoid another accident. So we're still very much involved in it. Does anyone has any question? If so, just turn on your camera and switch off or unmute yourself. Hi.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Peter Visser. Hi, Jerry.
Hi.
Really nice to hear about your early days.
Yeah.
Actually, I would like to know a little bit your view on the future. With all changes coming up in the carbon footprint reduction, etc., we have to transform our industries. What do you see as the biggest challenges in corrosion and corrosion science for the future?
Right. Yeah. So I don't have any crystal balls or any great wisdom, but what I know is that we will continue to use materials. And as we do that, there will continue to be corrosion problems. So yeah, again, it's not sexy, but in everything that we do, environmental degradation will be a problem. So yeah, right now, lightweighting of vehicles, right, is a big deal. So, mixed metals are, a thing. We don't make steel cars anymore. They're, made from all kinds of, well, not just steel. So you know all about it. So I think that regardless of what we're doing, right? So I worked for IBM, right? And people always wonder, well, why does IBM care about corrosion, right? Well, so I'll tell you that there's sort of an inverse relationship of magnetic properties and corrosion resistance. And IBM was really the center of magnetic storage technology until they sold that business and everything else. But, microelectronics, and, as we go to whatever, quantum computing, whatever it is that we're doing, we have to be able to make those materials. We have to, they have to survive. So, yeah, so I don't have any doubt that corrosion will be an important topic. I think we'll go through cycles of being recognized as an important topic. And again, I think that it's sort of cycled up in recent years because of the de-emphasis of nanobio in the field of material science and the re-emphasis on manufacturing, on energy, right? So energy is obviously a focus for the world and is going to be, right? And so there are all kinds of corrosion issues with energy, nuclear amongst them, but certainly, battery technology is deeply connected to corrosion science. So, I'm not sure which one is going to be, the trends as things go up and down. But so I have no doubt that corrosion is a good field, for a prolonged career, if you're willing to make changes. So it was not a good field for a prolonged career at IBM because IBM changed. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, that might not be satisfying to you, Peter, but that's about all I can say.
Let's say we have now in our field, we have a lot of job security because there are many issues also in infrastructure, right? New designs, new challenges that are coming up in order to protect all those materials. Right. Okay, nice to see you, Gerald.
Yeah, great seeing you, Peter.
Does anyone else have a question, a comment? Just unmute yourself and ask directly. I think there are a question popping up in the chat. Agus? Okay, otherwise, basically, what he asked is that how to immediately cope with a sharp shifting from non-corrosion to corrosion-based career. I'm not really sure. So you want to know how to move from a non-corrosion to a corrosion-based career, Agus? Like, I'm not really sure I follow you.
Yes, that's okay. Me. Yeah. So basically, my previous career was a teacher, a chemistry, a Cambridge ASN A-level teacher. So and then after joining master degree program, I fell in love with corrosion and its stuff, right? And then fortunately, I'm now doctoral degree student for corrosion, and I'm developing the corrosion inhibitor. So and then it's kind of quite a hassle for me just to to adjust my brain, to adjust my behavior from the educational system to something quite interesting. Thank you, Noémie. Thank you, Prof. Gerald.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing all the right stuff. So right now in the US, the job market's very good, right? During the pandemic, it was bad. I had some students who suffered trying to find a job, really for the first time in my career. But that has changed. There seem to be, well, there are jobs in general in the United States. So I don't know, you got to jump in, get experience. I don't think that there's anything to it. I think there's a lot of opportunity, all kinds of good opportunities. Good luck.
Thanks, Prof.
Some other question from the audience?
Come on, folks.
I have one otherwise. That was actually, oh no, go for it, Alan.
Hey, Jerry, I really like your talk. And my question, I think I had a hard time during my PhD, everyone has. And you talked about the Joe effect when you were getting your candidacy, right? And someone is criticizing the experiment and everything. And I bet it was very hard to not give up, right? So did anyone help you to not give up and like keep going until you got your PhD? When things get really hard.
Yeah, so Aline was my former PhD student who is now back in Brazil. I'll tell you that well, it was very easy for me to give up that artifact of Joule heating. I struggled, though. I didn't talk about the struggles I had in my PhD work. So I showed you the results of working with single crystals. So I had purchased some rods that were sort of finger-sized single crystal rods, and I had to cut from those rods slices that were oriented in a certain way that, again, this easy glide in FCC happens only in certain orientations. So yeah, I had to do some crystallography and slice very thin slices out of these rods, and then thin them further by electropolishing, and then attach plates to grip them and mount them in a cell. Okay, so single crystals are notoriously soft, right? So they, you know, they haven't been, they've just been grown, they haven't been deformed, and so it was, and so I had to manipulate all of this stuff around a small thin slice of single crystal that ended up being 15 microns in thickness, right? I'm hanging a cell on it, attaching these grips, putting it in a slow strain rate machine. And it was very easy for that experiment to go wrong. Okay, so for the sample to and you know, bend and then it wouldn't work. So I had a success rate of about 50% in my experiments. And I had a fixed amount of material. I had like 2 of these rods that I was cutting up in certain orientations. That was really frustrating to me. I used to bang my hand against a cinder block wall when one of these experiments went wrong. There were a series, we had a series of Japanese postdocs who went on to you know, who were great people in Japan. And I had a lot of help from them. And the last name was Rokuro Nishimura. And he taught me a Japanese word, which is gumba, gumba, he'd say, which is like, keep going, you know, you can do it, something like that. And so he was like a you know, a cheerleader in the background. You know, he'd say, you're gonna be good, you're gonna get through this. And you know, he was really helpful to me. I'll tell you that. That was another experience. I could have talked about that. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. I don't know that I ever, did you ever hear that story before, Eleni?
No, but it's a great one.
So
I think
sure
I never give up just because I had people pushing me.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I ever told that story either.
No.
So, but that's also, you know, that's not quite Marcel Courbet, but yeah, similar.
Let's take a last question from Sanjay. He put a question in the chat. Sanjay, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, actually, hi, Prof. Actually, it was quite a motivational talk, and really it has touched me in your, like, the way actually research goes is very much like you said. There are always hurdles and we have to overcome. So as a future corrosionist and material science researcher, I want to know, like in present situation, like we have a lot of problems with the economic situation, we have war going on, we have pollution, global warming, a lot of issues, and also the rising population, lack of resources. And in such cases, we have to think of sustainability always, because we have to survive in this planet with the limited resources. So I'm thinking like how we can relate corrosion to sustainability, and how like we can get collaborations to meet these goals, because this cannot be done by only corrosionists. We have to merge different areas, I guess, to achieve those goals. So how we can merge, and how can the societies and how can we get the help from the societies and the other bodies which are present?
Yeah, oh, well, great question, and thank you for you know, the first comment about you know, overcoming hurdles, because you know, I think really that's what a PhD is about. Okay, yeah. Is learning how to you know, that you reach a problem and you have to learn how to defeat it, right? So how to, it's a barrier in your process. You have to go over it, under it, through it, around it, you know, get someone to you know, bring you a ladder so you can climb over it. You know, you have to figure out how to do that, and that happens in research, it happens in life. So that's what a PhD is about. And Alini is one who had to do that several times during her PhD work, and hopefully, that's helped her in real life. In terms of sustainability, yeah, I think corrosion is, it's a perfect match for sustainability. I think that it's a close fit. It's easy, right? So things aren't sustainable if they corrode. We use a lot of materials to reduce corrosion that cause problems, in the environment. There's of course, inhibitors and coatings. There's a lot of water loss because of corrosion. There's a lot of pollution because of corrosion, pipelines that are corroding. So I think that corrosion has a natural fit in any kind of sustainability institute that is, put together. Yeah, I don't see there being a problem trying to make that work.
And my second question is, how can we get help from the societies to achieve such goals? Like, how can we connect with, like, what kind of help we can expect, or we can get in touch with the societies to get help?
Yeah, so, I don't know the EFC so well. I've attended a lot of EuroCore conferences, and I know, like the president of the EFC, but I think that the people who run it are anxious to, to help in any way. So, I think if you have some good initiative, they'd be willing to listen. So again, I think it's a natural fit. Don't be bashful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof.
Any last questions?
Let me say one more thing. Oh, I forgot. I meant to include some mention of Corrosion. So
that's true.
I think know about Corrosion. Go for it. And so if you want to know more about it, contact me or Google Corrosion, and go to the website and see a bunch of great recordings. And the dirty secret is I have recordings of all of them. If you want links, let me know. I can send you a link to those that aren't posted on the website. So these are webinars by great people. So go ahead.
Prof, is it possible to get a YouTube channel for Corrosion? Because that will be really helpful for everyone to see. Then you can upload, we can see the videos in the YouTube channel of Corrosion. Huh. I have attended 2 or 3 lectures, but it will be really helpful because then we can see it anytime we want.
Yeah, so they are at the Corrosion website, but right, I can yeah, I'm not great on social media, but YouTube is a thing, we can figure that out. Thank you, Sanjay, for that.
Thank you.
Hi, Shan.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
And there's Kushal. Yeah, hi.
Yeah, yeah, I have a few questions. So I really enjoyed your presentation, and some of the story I've heard it and some of them not. So so my question, so I joined the Novellus last year. So I stayed in the academia for so very long time, and then right now transferred to the industry R&D. So I really like my job, and at this point, I don't want to go back to academia again. So after I started my job in industry, so I feel there is a large gap between the academia research and the industry needs. So I feel in academia, we more focus on the hot topic, and yes, hot topic is important, but we more focus on the publications. But the industry needs, we want to solve the problem. We want to reduce the cost. We want to, for example, for aluminum, we focus on sustainability and how to increase the recycled content, but still keep the good resistance, corrosion resistance. We want to accelerate the alloy design. But those are really challenging problems. How do you think in the future, the academic research direction, especially in the corrosion, how to academia to solve, to help the industry to solve this problem? And then the second is, so like you working in the IBM for several years, and before you started your academic career, and at OSU, there's also several professors that before they join become the faculty, and they also work in industry several years. So how do you think, what kind of suggestion you gave like people like a research scientist like me working in industry, but maybe in the 10 years, we still want to go back to academia?
Okay. So yeah, the first one, I think that, you know, the work that is done by people in industry, like at Novellus, is really distinctly different than what we do here. Okay, so you know, it doesn't make sense for us to solve the kinds of problems in the time frames that you care about, right? So we are good at looking at the underlying issues, right? And certainly corrosion is a field with a lot of applications and will continue to be a very applied field. But you know, I think that some professors operate by essentially doing, you know, mini consulting projects and putting together a research program that way. And I don't think that works so well. You know, so you know, again, I think that what we have the time and the tools to look at those problems, understand the fundamental mechanisms, the way that you know, even though you've got a lot of capability at a place like Novellus, you don't really have the time to do it. So I think that's the great partnerships that can exist in that way. And you know, planning for academic job, right? Obviously, you need to continue to publish, and that's not easy in most places. I mean, I could do that at IBM, but in most places that's not very easy. You know, going around to conferences and talking about what you're doing is often not easy. So it's hard, especially in this day and age when there aren't a lot of great industrial research labs the way there used to be. So in the US, we have some government labs, and you know, they certainly exist you know, around the world. You know, Max Planck labs, et cetera. So those places are places to go that aren't really industry, but you know, where you continue to publish. So I don't know, can't give you more than that, Shanshan.
Thank you.
And so the last question from Kushal.
Hello, Dr. Frankel. A really interesting talk. I mean, really good stories. I have one question continuing to once you said about like when you defended your candidacy, you had a kind of conflict of understanding on the topic, and there was a published paper for that, and the contradicting fact as well. So my question is like in a broader range in academia. So was it ever, so now you said like this paper is still being cited. So, I mean, do we address this problem somewhere, like, you know, that there was a different understanding to it, and then the earlier paper had some artifacts that were explained. And secondly, the second continuation to that question is, we don't see many publications which are failures in the lab. Like we don't see, a lot of people keep spending time on the same thing which is already done by someone else in the lab, which is already proved to be a failure. I mean, for the journals, would it be a good thing to consider those things somewhere down the line, or do you?
Yeah, so it's not clear, you know, how you can stop that from happening. Other, you know, it was published. Yeah, I think that maybe journals can add something, right? You can't, you know, you don't want to change what's already been published, right?
Sure.
That's archival, right? So these archival journals have to continue, but you can add comments behind them that indicate, you know, what the story is. Like, see these papers. But yeah, it's a problem that where you know, I don't know, like the wrong papers are often very highly cited, you know. So you know, if you're just going back and you look at you know, you do a search and you order according to the number of citations, these papers could rise to the top. And, you know, it's hard to know, you know, I think you have to read the literature very well is the bottom line. I think, you know, you have to make sure that you know, that you really read and understand all the literature. I think that's probably, you know, another moral of this story.
And I mean, I would also like to ask you a comment on the second part, like, we don't publish our failures in the lab. Like we start with something and then.
There is actually a journal. I don't remember the exact name, but it's something like a journal of failed experiment or something like that. Google it. There is actually one journal where you can publish failed experiment. It exists.
Yeah. So yes. So there was, I taught a course this semester on failure analysis, and we read a book that's called "To Fail is Human," which is like similar to the phrase "to err is human." And this author talks about how we learn from failure, right? So failure leads to success, and actually success leads to failure, because, you know, something happens well and then people push it beyond its limits, and then that leads to failure. So failures are really important. Yeah. And so, right, I think that's something to learn in your career, that when things fail, to learn a lesson from them. So absolutely. Yeah, you can publish. It's not common to do that, but you could. There is that.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you for that talk.
So I think let's wrap up. Thank you so much, Jerry, for being with us, for sharing all the stories.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yes, it was for us as well. I learned so many things. So things I knew, things I forgot, and so on. Thank you for everyone else who joined. And as I said, the recording will be put on YouTube like next week, probably. So yes, see you soon. And for those of you who join Eurocore, see you at Eurocore in Berlin, end of August. Bye, have a good afternoon.